Hello, welcome back, and this is part 2 of sentence fragments, and let's review the final 2 types of fragment errors. Now, in part 1 of the video on sentence fragments, we discussed the first 2 types of fragment errors. The first one was called dependent word fragments. And then the second one was called fragments that are missing subjects. So it's important that you understand these 2 types of fragment errors as well as the 2 new ones that I will be introducing in this video. So the third type of fragment is called ing and to fragments. Word groups which include ing words near the beginning of the sentence may frequently result in a sentence fragment. These types of fragments often lack a subject, and they often lack part of a verb. Let's take a look at an example together, and it'll make it a lot easier to follow. In this sentence, feeling sick and feverish, Susan decided to leave class early. Now, Susan decided to leave class early is a complete thought. Susan is your subject, decided is your verb, and now you know what she's decided. She's decided that she would leave early, so it's a full thought. But take a look at the first half, feeling sick and feverish. That is a fragment. Reason being, there's no subject, you don't know who's feeling sick and feverish, and there's only part of the verb, feeling. You might have to say he was feeling or she was feeling. So you only have part of the verb in feeling and absolutely no subject. So this becomes a fragment. So the first word group, feeling sick and feverish, is missing both the subject and the part of the verb, so it cannot stand by itself as a sentence. And yet the second sentence is complete because it has your subject and your verb. So how can we correct this? What can we do to correct this error? Well, here's one thing. You can connect the fragment to either the sentence that comes before or the sentence that comes after it. So let's take a look at this correction. Feeling sick and feverish, Susan decided to leave class early. So in this case, you've put the dependent word clause at the beginning. Feeling sick and feverish, comma, Susan decided to leave class early. Or you could join the dependent clause, the fragment, and put it at the end of the sentence. So you could say, Susan decided to leave class early, feeling sick and feverish. So you can put it at the end. Either way, but you notice that there's a comma. There's a comma if you begin with this thought, and there's a comma just before the thought if you end with it. So that's one way you can correct it. You can connect the fragment to the sentence either before or to the sentence after, whichever makes better sense to you. A second method is you can add a subject and a verb to the fragment. So if you look at this correction, Susan was feeling sick and feverish. She decided to leave class early. So you've added a subject, Susan, and part of the verb. So you've got was feeling now. So you've added both, Susan and then was feeling. So by adding the subject and the verb and making it a complete subject and complete verb, you no longer have a fragment error. Now I'd like you to note the comma rules when you have an ing word group, because I mentioned up here that you need to include a comma. So let's look at when you put the comma in. Tossing and turning all night, period. I was unable to sleep. I was unable to sleep is a complete thought. This is complete because you've got your subject I and your verb was. But tossing and turning all night, it's a fragment. First of all, you don't know who was tossing and turning all night, and you only have part of the verb. It would have to be was tossing, because you'd say I was tossing. So it's missing part of the verb right here. So what would you do to correct it? Well, you could say tossing and turning all night, comma, I was unable to fall asleep. So tossing and turning all night, comma, I was unable to fall asleep. So note that you must use the comma after the ing group when the ing word group begins the sentence. So now that you've started the sentence with the ing word group, tossing and turning all night, you have to put the comma after the ing word group. Let's look at the second example. Mary was up all night trying to write a conclusion to her essay. This one's complete. Mary is your subject. Your verb is was, and you know she was up all night. It's not a long sentence. It's not a very descriptive sentence, but it is a complete thought. But look at this one, trying to write a conclusion to her essay. This is a fragment. There's no subject, and it's missing part of the verb, missing a verb part. So how could you correct it? You could say Mary was up all night, comma, trying to write a conclusion to her essay. Now note that the comma is used to set off the words trying to write a conclusion to her essay because this is extra material at the end of the sentence. So in this number one sentence, you added the ing word group at the beginning of the sentence, so you put the comma here. But in the second sentence, you added it at the end, the ing word group, trying to write a conclusion to her essay, so you have to put the comma before it. So you always have to have a comma either in front or after that ing word group because it's called extra material. And in this case, the extra material was added at the beginning, tossing and turning all night. And in this one, you added it at the end. So in both cases, you need to follow the comma rules. And another point here, when a word group begins with the word to followed by a verb, a fragment often occurs. Now let's see what I mean by this. In this sentence, Betty ran 20 kilometers to raise money for her favorite charity. This is complete. You've got a subject, you've got a verb. It's a short sentence, but this is complete. Betty ran, and you know how far she ran. But this second word grouping, to raise money for her favorite charity, it's a fragment because you have no idea who's doing the raising of the money. It's an incomplete thought. It's a fragment. So there are two methods to correct this fragment error. And let's take a look at the ways I've corrected them. The first one, you could connect the fragment to the sentence that comes before it. So you could join this fragment, to raise money for a favorite charity, to the sentence that comes before. So here's the correction. Betty ran 20 kilometers, and here we're joining it, to raise money for her favorite charity. You don't need any punctuation here. And I'll explain that further in a moment. The second example, you could have written a complete thought, a period, and then another complete thought, so that they be two independent thoughts. Each thought has a subject and a verb. So what you could do is add a subject and a verb to the fragment. So take a look. Betty ran 20 kilometers. That was already complete. But look what you've done to the second one. Instead of saying to raise money for her favorite charity, you'd say she wanted to raise money for her favorite charity. So you've added the subject she, and you've added the verb wanted, and now it's complete. So here are a few more comma rules. I said, note these comma rules. When you begin a sentence with a two-word group, the idea has to be followed by a comma. So if you start a sentence with to, blah, 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 and it's a word group beginning with to, you have to end that word group with a comma. So let's take a look at this sentence. To lose 20 pounds, Jenna had to cut out junk food from her diet. Here's your fragment, the two-word group. This one is complete, right? Because here's your subject, here's your verb, and there's the thought completed. So how could you correct it? Well, I said to lose 20 pounds, comma, so I'm joining it to this sentence, Jenna had to cut out junk food from her diet. So notice that you must use the comma in here after the two-word group when the two-word group begins the sentence, because this is called introductory material. You're introducing the material, and you've started with to, and in this case, to lose 20 pounds. Another example, Lois had to sleep with 3 heavy blankets to keep warm. Okay, this one is complete. You've got your subject, you've got your verb. But to keep warm, that's a fragment. It's one of those two-word groupings. So how can you correct it? Well, you can join it to the sentence before. So you could take this fragment and join it to the sentence before. That's the easiest thing to do. Lois had to sleep with 3 heavy blankets. There's your comma. To keep warm. So note that the comma is used to set off the words to keep warm, as this is extra material at the end of the sentence. So whether you're adding it to the beginning of the sentence, which is called introductory material, or whether you're using it at the end of the sentence, which is like concluding material, wherever that two-word group goes, you need to follow the comma rule. And here's the final rule, and this is called adding detail fragments. Added detail fragment errors lack a subject, and they also lack a verb, a major grammatical error. Frequently they begin with one of these words or phrases. Often they'll begin with also, especially, except, for example, including, and such as. Not always, but these are often words that lead to fragment errors. So there are 3 ways that you can correct these added detail fragment errors. The first is you can attach the fragment to the thought before, the preceding thought. The second is you can add a subject and a verb to the thought that's not complete, and then you would turn the incomplete thought into a complete thought by adding the subject and the verb. And the third is you can change or add words wherever you feel it's necessary to make the sentence clear. So I've given you a number of examples to help you understand this rule. The first one, Joe dislikes eating Italian food except for pizza. Well, this one is complete. You've got your subject, you've got your verb, and you know what Joe likes. So this first sentence is complete. But except for pizza, it's not even, you're not saying enough here. That's missing a subject, it's missing a verb. So here's the fragment, and there's no subject, and there's also no verb. So how can you correct it? Well, I've shown you one way. Joe dislikes eating Italian food, comma, and now you've joined it, except for pizza. So what I've done here is I've attached the sentence fragment to the preceding thought, the thought that went before it. So the comma must be included before the word except, as the words except for pizza is called added material at the end of the sentence. So here it is added at the end of the sentence. You have to put the comma before the word except. Another example, my sister loves all kinds of sports, for example, skiing, tennis, golf, and bowling. This first part is correct. Sister is the subject, loves is the verb, and you know what she loves. This is the fragment. And again, we mentioned up here that these words, also especially except, for example, including, and such as, can often lead to fragments. Well, here's an example of it right here. For example, there's no subject and there's no verb. You can't use this subject, sister, for this sentence. It must be included. You have to write the word, my sister also likes. You have to include the subject in this fragment. So how can you correct it? Well, here's one way. My sister loves all kinds of sports. I put a period and now a new sentence, and I've added words. For example, she, I've added a subject, loves, I've added a verb, skiing, tennis, golf, and bowling. So in this example, we've added a subject and a verb to the fragment to make it a complete thought. And one last one, and then we'll wrap it up. I have traveled to many places in the world, including England, Italy, China, and Egypt. So looking closely at this one, I have traveled to many places in the world. That's complete. I is the subject, and have traveled is the complete verb, and it's a full thought. You know where you've traveled as well. Including England, Italy, China, and Egypt, we mentioned in the list that often a word like including or for example or especially, except for, can lead to a fragment, and that's what it is because there's no subject and no verb here. So how can you correct it? Well, I've added words as needed to make it complete and make it a better worded, clearer sentence. So I wrote England, Italy, China, and Egypt, so I started with the second part of the sentence, are only some of the many places to where I have traveled. So I've added all these words in to make it a lot clearer. So words are added as needed to make the fragment part of the preceding sentence. So to conclude, a short conclusion, I would like you to remember that every single complete sentence has to have a subject as well as a verb, and it must express a complete thought. If it does not include all of these characteristics which have been outlined, your sentence is called a sentence fragment, and it is considered a major grammatical error. Now, we use fragments in our everyday conversation, and we can also use it in informal writing. So if you're writing a letter to a friend, you can have an incomplete thought or a sentence fragment like, what a day. You could say to a friend in conversation or in a letter, what a day. So that is missing. You didn't say, what an amazing day I had, or I have had quite a day. So that would be a fragment, and that's okay in personal writing or if you're just having a personal conversation with somebody. However, please remember this, that a sentence fragment is not acceptable in any form of academic writing, in college and university writing, in technical writing, and in business writing. You're writing a business letter, you want to write any kind of a letter to a company or a letter applying for a job, you must make sure that you do not include any fragment errors. So thank you for joining me. I've given you a lot of rules. I hope that you found the rules easy to understand, and try the practice questions. I do have a series of practice questions as well as answers that you could practice and see how you've done. And if you need any further assistance, please feel free to contact me in the website, InTheEnglishCorner.com. Thank you very much, and I do look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.